Great to have Sam with us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate his time with us. Got another couple of weeks yet, I think. Something like that. Okay, I believe we're on to part 4 of our study of 1 Thessalonians. This time we're going to look at a section in 1 Thessalonians 3, 2 through 5. And we're going to look at the content of that and spin off to look at other verses which amplify the ideas there. So 1 Thessalonians 3, starting in verse 2. And we sent Timothy, our brother and fellow worker for God in the gospel of Christ, in order to strengthen and to encourage you about your faith, so that no one would be shaken by these afflictions. Okay, so Paul has established the congregation, Acts 17 in Thessalonica. He's had a good response, so he's established a congregation there. And first and second mainly, we see what a good congregation should be and what a good preacher, missionary, however you want to define it, should act. And we see a lot of the elements there. But in the process of that work happening, there was a great deal of opposition developed between the Jews and the townspeople, including the city council. And so Paul's forced to leave and he moves on. At this point he's in Athens and he gets a bit worried that because of the persecution the Christians there were receiving, that they might have fallen away. And it's always a danger when we run into problems as Christians and we get criticized and different things. It's always a problem that we might give in. So he sends Timothy to just check up on them, see how they're doing, and to encourage them. Verse 3 said, so that no one should be shaken by these afflictions. What he's wanting Timothy to do is encourage them and strengthen them and kind of help them reattach to the beliefs they had when Paul was there, to be faithful. Now, for you yourselves know that we are appointed for this. That he's talking about, I believe, is the persecution that happens, not always, but sometimes when we become Christians. When I first became a Christian, I learned about prayer and all that. I thought, okay, if I want to lead the perfect life and have no problems, I'll just pray that this happens and everything will be fine. Which I tried to do, but that didn't happen. I still kept having problems. And as I studied the Bible, I realized that having problems as Christians is part and parcel with being Christians. If we want to avoid the problems, the best way is to not be a Christian, because they're just part and parcel with the deal. He says, we are appointed for this. I think probably he's talking about Christians in general, not just the apostles, because his main concern is about the condition of the Thessalonian Christians. He says, we are appointed for this. When you signed up to be a Christian, you signed up for persecution and difficulties. Verse 4, for indeed when we were with you, we told you beforehand that we were about to be afflicted, just as indeed it happened, and you know. Because of this, I also, when I could endure it no longer, and now he's applying this situation to the Thessalonians. Because of this also, when I could endure it no longer, sent in order to know your faith, to know whether you'd been influenced away from Christ because of the persecution that you experienced, lest somehow the tempter tempted you and our labour should be in vain. So Paul acknowledges, especially with young Christians, that when we come against problems, because we're Christians, there is a danger of our falling away. I remember when I first became a Christian, before I became a Christian, I used to go to the pub with other farming people. I wasn't what you'd call a drunk. Some of my mates drank a fair bit, but I drank more to be sociable, but I did drink alcohol. And then when I became Christians, I still kept going to the pub, but I drank something else. I didn't drink alcohol. Not that I believed it was totally wrong, but I didn't drink it. I didn't want to have that influence. And to start with, a lot of my friends threw off at me, They said, this guy's something wrong with him. He's gone strange on us, whatever. But the more I stuck to not drinking alcohol, I found after a while they actually respected the fact that I was sticking with my views. If I'd have given up when they started giving me a hard time about it, I would have actually lost their respect, not gained it. And after a while, one of my friends would say, "Oh, what are you drinking?" You know, when it was their turn to buy drinks for everyone, they'd say, "Oh, what are you drinking, John?" And one of my other friends would say, "He drinks sarsaparilla," which is a non-alcoholic drink. I thought that was pretty neat. You know, they'd stop criticising me, they'd stop giving me a hard time, and they respected me and they went along with me. I think that's kind of what it's like if we stand our ground as Christians. If we give in, we will actually lose their respect, not gain it. We think we're doing what we're doing to please them, but in fact we won't please them. We'll really have the other effect. They won't take us seriously again. But if we stick with it, you know, that if you like calling it persecution or criticism may go for a little while, but eventually they will respect us. When I first became a Christian, my father said it was a waste of a good man. That was his comment. He didn't like the idea one bit. But a few years later, because of so many things that had happened to us that had really turned out for good, Dad said, well, you know, maybe there's something to it after all. He didn't become a Christian, but he could see much more the value of it than he did to start with. Term was a waste before, just a waste of a good man, you know. But if I'd given up, I wouldn't have got that respect or reaction from him. And we might have to fight through a bit for some people, but in the end, I think they will respect us. Okay, I want to kind of amplify this idea of affliction for the Christian. Affliction is part and parcel with the life of the Christian. We will get people that will disagree with us because we are Christians. For us in New Zealand, there's not a lot of physical persecution. There may be a bit of ridicule, but other parts of the world, and at this time, being a Christian could have meant their death. And the same application, if you like, would apply to those who might die because of their faith as us who just might get a bit of criticism. You know, it seems to me it's easier than ever to be a Christian. We can do it freely. We might get people disagreeing with us and throwing off at us, but we're not going to get people killing us. You know, we can easily become Christian if that is really what we want to. But sometimes we need this same sort of thinking that was given to help these people whose life was actually at stake. Okay, next passage I want to look at is Matthew chapter 10. This is just talking about the fact that affliction as Christian is going to come. Brother will hand over brother to death, and a father his children, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. As I said, that doesn't happen too much to us, but it does happen in some countries still. There was some opposition in Albania, which was mainly a Muslim country. Supposedly 70% were Muslims. And there were a few that were reasonably strong. Never heard of anyone getting killed because of their faith, but I've heard of parents who were pretty hard on their kids because they changed. Heard of parents there that tried not to let their kids come to church. One girl said, if you don't let me go to church, I'm going to jump out the window. And she was on about the third floor. And the parents knew she was serious. She was a very devoted Christian. So they let her go. You know, we have it easy here. But there are some probably Arab countries where you might be killed for being a Christian. You know? Verse 22. So this situation does exist. Not here. You know, we think, well, that's being a bit extreme. It's not extreme. It does happen. And you will be hated by everyone because of my name. And again, that's a bit of a generalization to emphasize the fact that Christians are not going to be loved by those outside of the church. But the one who endures to the end, this one will be saved. And that's the important point. If we give up, if we justify giving up because we're having a few problems with our neighbours or our parents or someone else, we're not going to get what we wanted when we became a Christian in the first place. But the one who endures to the end, this one will be saved. That's what we've got to keep in mind. In some ways, it's not a sprint, it's an endurance race. And whenever they persecute you in this town, and there more particularly it's talking about people who are going out to spread the message that Jesus has brought. And this may apply to people trying to evangelize a particular area today. It doesn't apply so much to Christians in general. And whenever they persecute you in this town, flee to another. So if they won't listen to you in one town, no point dying for it. Go to the next place where they might listen to you. And I think that's quite good advice. Some people just won't listen to us. If they refuse, there's no point, if we might say, ramming it down their throat. They're just not going to listen. Spend your time trying to talk to someone who is willing to listen. For truly I say to you, you will never finish going through the towns of Israel until the Son of Man comes. In this particular case, there's plenty of work to do without wasting your time on people who don't want to know. And that verse, don't cast your pearl before swine, comes to mind as well there. Why, in this case, why is it, if persecution comes, if you can, why is it better to move on to another area and try and be a good influence in that area rather than just sticking it out and waiting for them to kill you? 1 Timothy 2, 4 through 6. Jesus, or God, wants all people to be saved. Not just the people who won't listen. He wants them to be saved, but there are other people as well. God wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. So the job's not done until everyone's heard the message. And if one group or one person doesn't want to know, go on to the next person. That very much applies to us today, I think. For there is one God, one mediator between God and human beings, the man Jesus Christ. There's only one God. We can't allow other gods to take over. The job is to try and get the message out to everyone, because there is only one God who gave himself a ransom for all. Jesus died for everyone. Verse 24. And then, that goes back to Matthew 10. A disciple is not superior. This is why we should expect persecution. A disciple is not superior to his teacher. What's the point there? Our teacher is Jesus. What happened to Jesus during his lifetime? The Jews gave him a hard time. Eventually, the Romans killed him. Why should we expect to live the easy life when the teacher, the one we follow, received the ultimate punishment as the true religious person? So don't have in your mind the idea that life's going to be easy because I'm a Christian. That's the point I'm trying to make. A disciple is not superior to his teacher, nor a slave superior to his master. It is enough for the disciple that he becomes like his teacher. In other words, someone who would be superior to Jesus in this concept was someone who didn't allow any sort of persecution, to experience any sort of persecution. It is enough for the disciple that he become like his teacher. It's enough for us to become like Jesus. The big thing about Jesus and persecution, he was able to deal with it and not lose heart. The devil worked at him to try and get him to give up. Took him up onto the high pinnacle of the temple and said, look, all this is yours if you just bow down and worship me. Turn these stones into bread. You're hungry, you've fasted 40 days and you're hungry, turn these stones into bread. The devil worked at it. He never gave up. That's the whole point there. If we could be like Jesus in that way, we are truly his representatives. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, in this particular case, the master of the house is Jesus. He's the master of our house. If they called him Beelzebub, or a devil, a deceiver, and Jesus was accused of that when he worked various miracles, they said, no, he's doing the miracles because he's the devil. How much more the members of his household? So as Christians, in following Jesus, we're also accepting the fact that we will be afflicted and receive punishment or problems in this life for being a Christian. Not just problems, but because we are Christians. Now, 1 Peter 4, verses 12 through 16. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you when it takes place to test you. So Peter's talking about a group of people who are about to really suffer because they are Christians. He says, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal. Don't be surprised that this is going to happen. Don't let it throw you from being a Christian. And notice he says there, to test you. Are you real Christians or not? A real Christian will stand up under affliction and punishment and problems and will remain faithful. That's the test that affliction gives to us. To test you as if something strange, in other words, unheard of or unique, were happening to you. In other words, persecution for the Christian should not be accepted as something different. Why am I being treated this way? We shouldn't think that way. Verse 13, but to the degree that you share in the sufferings of Christ, rejoice, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice and be glad. So if we stand up under persecution, affliction, criticism as a Christian, we're willing to do that, we have proved we are true Christians, and we should rejoice in that fact. If we give up, we are not true Christians. We haven't really taken it on into our heart. Verse 14, if you are reviled on account of the name of Christ, you are blessed. And these are all things I think we should be thinking if we experience that situation. Your parents are criticizing you for being a Christian, or your friends are laughing at you because of your beliefs. If we stand our ground, and it is teaching the truth in love, not getting into a violent argument with them, it's preaching the truth in love. If we do that and stand our ground, Jesus said we are blessed. Because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. You are a true Christian. You have truly taken on the spirit of what it means to be a Christian. Verse 15, by all means do not any one of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or as an evildoer or a meddler. He's not just talking about suffering in general here. It's not good to be thrown in prison because you murdered your father or whatever. That's not what he's talking about. It's suffering unjustly. And in this case, because we represent Christ before other people. So don't suffer as a murderer. It's not just suffering that's good. It's suffering for Christ that is good. But if someone suffers as a Christian, he must not be ashamed. And again, that often does, we feel like when someone's having a go at us over something. Maybe we feel a little bit ashamed of ourselves because this is happening. But as a Christian, instead of feeling shame, we should feel pride for having the strength to stand up for Jesus. But he must glorify God with his name. Okay, Romans chapter 5. And not only this, but we also boast in our afflictions, because we know that afflictions produce patient endurance. And I've got a few verses on this general subject which I'd kind of like to get through. In fact, suffering affliction and being able to remain faithful in spite of it is actually tremendously good for us. We may not enjoy it, but it is actually tremendously good for it. And not only this, but we also boast in our afflictions. We're proud of our afflictions because we know that afflictions produce endurance. And patient endurance, proven character. Proven character, I think, is the ability to do what we need to do in spite of difficulties. Do what is right to do in spite of difficulties. That takes character. Proven character, hope. In other words, in spite of the difficulties, we can see the good that's going to come out the other end. Ultimately, that good is heaven. And these are the way we should view afflictions when they're coming along. If we're going to make the most of afflictions and suffering for being Christians, we have to take an attitude towards those problems. This is the attitude that we should have. And hope does not disappoint because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. So this process of building us up as spiritual beings on earth comes through affliction. If we give up for affliction, it won't happen. But if we stand up, be confident in Christ and do what is right in spite of difficulties, this process will happen to us. James 1, starting in verse 2, consider it all joy, my brothers, whenever you encounter various trials. The reason we should feel joy is this is going to do us some good. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. The more we stand up under suffering, the more we will be able to endure suffering in the future. And let endurance have its perfect effect, or let endurance work perfectly. In other words, complete its job within you, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. So if we never suffer in any way for our faith, we will be weak Christians. We will be immature Christians. If we're willing to suffer and remain faithful, that suffering will mean that as far as our life is concerned, we will lack nothing. Rather, as far as our spiritual life is concerned. There's a passage I know I've been over a few times, but I wanted to include it here, which is talking about Paul's, what he called the thorn in the flesh. 2 Corinthians 12, the whole passage I'll just highlight it, 7 through 10. Paul said he was given a thorn in the flesh. He called it a messenger of Satan, which was given to torment him. Notice it says it was given to him, and the implication there, I think, is it was given to him by God. Paul's situation was, he became a much more direct messenger from God than we are. He was given the actual revelations to give to mankind. We just learn those revelations and then we pass them on to others. But he was actually given them directly from God. He called it in the first verse, verse 7 there, to an extraordinary degree of revelation. You imagine a weak human being given that sort of responsibility and that sort of privilege. A person who could stand up before a crowd as God gave me this message for you. And it's actually true. He hasn't just made it up to make it a stronger message so people will listen to him more or respect him more. With Paul, it was actually true. Because of that, he was given this thorn in the flesh to keep him humble. Because of the huge privilege his role gave him as one of the original preachers of the gospel. Then in verse 8, 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would depart from me. So he prayed, he said 3 times to lose this thorn in the flesh, which more than likely was his eyesight. There's other passages we're not going to get there that indicate it was his eyesight. So he asked for it to be taken away from him. What was God's response? He said in verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you. And I can take a huge amount of comfort from this. When we've got weakness, when we've got problems, and we think, well, I could be so much more effective servant of God if I didn't have these weaknesses. And quite possibly that's what Paul is thinking here. I could be so much more effective as an apostle if I didn't have these problem eyes. But God said, and this is an attitude we should take, my kindness is sufficient for you. I think what he's saying is, look, I'm willing to accept you as you are. You just make the best of what you are. Don't worry about becoming physically perfect. Don't worry about becoming something you're not. You just make use of the best of what you are, what I've given you as you are, with your bad eyes, and I accept you as that. But the second point, That's the first point he makes here. He says, because the power, meaning physical power on our part, the power is perfected in weakness. Your spiritual strength is going to be perfected not by everything being easy for you, but by these weaknesses you want to get rid of. Why do we want to get rid of these weaknesses if they're going to end up giving us more spiritual strength, in a sense, more acceptability of God, more effectiveness? It's the spiritual strength that's the important thing, not the physical strength. So power is perfected in weakness. And that weakness comes from persecution, from affliction, from problems, difficulties we're trying to overcome. That's how we truly become strong. And in verse 10, therefore I delight in weakness, in insult and calamities, in persecutions, and in difficulties for the sake of Christ. I rejoice in these problems, Paul said. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. So these weaknesses, these problems, are going to end up in me being spiritually very strong. Okay, 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 through 8. Therefore we did not lose heart, but even if our outer person is being destroyed. What's the conclusion of this whole thing? This whole thoughts about persecution and problems and affliction. Therefore we do not lose heart. Because of the teachings, in a sense, I've just given, we do not lose heart. Because it's actually beneficial to us. There's no reason to lose heart. But even if our outer person is being destroyed, even if our body is breaking down, becoming ineffective, we're losing our eyesight, we're losing our hearing, our knees are going. Sam doesn't know what I'm talking about, but the older people here probably do. So even if our outer person is being destroyed, yet our inner person is being renewed day after day. In other words, our spiritual being is getting stronger as a result of the situation all the time. For our momentary light affliction is producing in us an eternal weight of glory. So these difficulties, if we treat them correctly or we view them correctly, will end up the greatest reward that life has to offer. If we give in, we're looking for the reward of a bit less pain. If we don't give in to them, we will have what he calls an eternal weight of glory. In other words, something so much more valuable. We won't even think about the problems we went through to achieve this. Verse 18, because we are not looking at what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is not seen is eternal. That's where we've got to keep our mind concentrating on. What is not seen. The body is not important in the overall scheme of things. It's nice to have good health, don't get me wrong. But the very much more important thing about our life is our spiritual life. And affliction and persecution is an integral part of a powerful spiritual life. So don't avoid persecution for the sake of comfort. Think about what you're going to gain from it. Okay, thanks. I'll close with a word of prayer. Mighty God in heaven,